Hi, my name is David Gerry, and I am here again to go over with you guys an SAT reading practice test. So today what we'll be doing is we'll be looking at not a fiction passage this time, but a historical passage. So with historical passages, generally people tend to think that they are on the difficult side. Most of the reason being that they tend to use vocab that is sort of not necessarily known to the modern era. And so when we look at this kind of passage, what's actually interesting about it is most of the time it actually contains the easiest questions rather than the hardest questions, despite the vocab being hard. And I'm going to let you know that we don't need to necessarily know what the words within this passage actually mean by looking at only, as we mentioned before, the first and last sentences, as well as if there's any quotes, will allow us to solve the passage immediately. So we're going to go right into things right now. All right, so when we look at this first sort of paragraph, we see close at hand is a bridge over the river Thames, the admirable vantage ground for us to make a survey. So we're going to keep reading until we sort of get an idea of what the subject is here. So the river flows beneath. Barges pass, laden with timber, bursting with corn. They're on one side of the domes and spires of the city, on the other, Westminster and the Houses of Parliament. Okay, so it sounds like we're talking about the setting here. We want to know, who are they talking about? Who? It is a place to stand on by the hour dreaming, but not now. Now we are pressed for time. Okay, now we know the subject, seems like. Now we are here to consider facts. Now we must fix our eyes upon the procession of the sons of educated men. Sounds like they're talking about something around the lines of men, and men needing to do something, men being pressed for time, as they said. So now we're going to look at sort of the last few sentences. Okay, so I'm going to read the last sentence right now. Where, in short, is it leading us? The procession of the sons of educated men. Oh, so when we look at this sentence, we also see similarities, right? We see that this procession of the sons of educated men is something that's coming out multiple times within the passage. Okay, so now that we know that, I am going to look to see if there are any important quotes. I don't see any important quotes, so I'm going to skip to the questions now. Now, in terms of order of the questions, as we mentioned before, you want to avoid doing main idea questions and start with those line questions. So when we look at line questions, where do we start? We look at number one, the main purpose of the passage is to what? That's a main idea question. Number two, the central claim of the passage is that so. These are, just very stereotypical main idea questions, so we're going to skip them. We're going to go on to number 34. So when we look at 34 originally, Wolfe used the word we throughout the passage mainly to what? So this also looks like a main idea question, given the fact that we have the words throughout the passage. But what I'm going to tell you guys is we read the first paragraph, right? And they mentioned we. So maybe, given the fact that we've already seen that we can read that we again and potentially get a good idea of what we need for the answer here. So we go back and look. We had now we are pressed for time. Remember that came out here? Now we are here to consider facts. Now we must fix our eyes upon the procession. Okay, so it looks like they're talking about a group here, right? We as a whole must do this. We as a whole must do that. So it's basically like a call to action, right? So when we look at a call to action for people to do something, let's see if we can find out what would be most appropriate here. Okay, so looking at first, reflect the growing friendliness among a group of people. So friendliness doesn't seem like they're trying to do that with the word we, right? And one of the things that's also wrong with this is the fact that it says growing, right? We know that we is used throughout the passage. We wouldn't be used to reflect something growing, but something sustaining, right? So we know it can't be growing. Okay, B, advance the need for candor among a group of people. Candor is what? Honesty, Okay, is it telling people they need to be honest? Not necessarily. It's telling people they need to unite, right? That can't be it. Establish a sense of solidarity among a group of people. Okay, here we go. What do I mean? Solidarity means what? It means unity, right? So establish a sense of unity among a group of people. And then just to check things, let's look at D. Reinforce the need for respect among a group of people. In this case, also reinforcing the need for respect, not necessarily, it's not a reinforcement, right? It's established something originally. So we know in this case, the answer must be C, right? Okay, moving forward. According to the passage, Wolf chooses the setting of the bridge because it is what? Okay, so this is not a line question, so we need to find where he talks about the bridge. So where does he talk about the bridge? The first sentence, right? So it says, close at hand is a bridge over the river Thames. Okay, so let's think about what a bridge is usually used for. It's used for what? Connecting one side to the other. Then also what? On a bridge, you can sort of see views, right? So in this case, it says an admirable vantage ground. Vantage, even if you don't necessarily know what this word means, it says in this case to make a survey. So in survey means to look out, right? To see something, to see the extent of some sort of land or building, etc., to evaluate. So vantage in this case means sort of a place to see something, a sight, right? So an admirable place to see sort of the scenery around us. That's what basically this is saying. So when we look at this question, it becomes a lot easier. So it's conducive to a mood of fanciful reflection. Is that necessarily right? I think this is more indirect. We don't necessarily know whether A is right, so we can't pick it. Let's look at B now. Provides a good view of the procession of the sons of educated men. Here we go. Good view, right? Vantage point, the same words, right? And then educated men. Let's just make sure this is right. So it says, now we must fix our eyes upon the procession. So at this bridge, they can see the procession. So there we go. So B must be the answer here as well. Okay, number 36. Wolf indicates the procession she describes in the passage is what? Okay, so this is a line question. So with this kind of line question, we want to answer 37 before 36. When we answer 36, what we want to make sure we do is start with A and work ourselves down to D. But with this, what's most important about looking at 37 is we want to know what the subject is that we're trying to find. So procession is the subject, right? So the procession these lines must be about the procession and its development, right? So let's look at line 12 to 17. There they go, our brothers who have been educated at public schools and university, mounting those steps, passing out of those doors, ascending those pulpits, preaching, teaching, administering justice, practicing medicine, transacting business, making money. Okay, so this is not necessarily about the procession, but it's the men within the procession. So that can't be the answer here. Let's look at 17 to 19. There's a solemn sort of way, a procession like a caravanserai crossing a desert. But now for the past 20 years, is no longer a sight, merely a photograph. Okay, so with this, they're actually just comparing the, let's look. The men. They're talking about the men being a procession like a caravanserai crossing a desert. Okay, so this is pretty vague and it doesn't necessarily get what we want. Let's look at 23 to 24. For they're traipsing along at the tail end of the procession. I think they're talking about the procession directly. We go ourselves. Okay, so in this case, we have a challenge here. So who is we here? Do we know necessarily who we is? So we know that the author is talking about brothers separately. So given that logic, we can infer that this group of we, are not men, but women, right? So when we look again, in the case of the procession she describes, also we know that the author is a she, right? So we must be she. Okay, So if those are the right quotes, it's saying traipsing along the Tennessee procession, we go ourselves. So there's this procession originally, and now women are at the back of it. So if women are at the back of it, they're all of a sudden participating, right? They're developing. They're becoming a part of what is traditionally only known to men. So when we look at these answers, there's only one that really makes sense. Less exclusionary in its membership, right? So B is the right line, and in 37 we know that 23 to 24 is right. Okay. Moving forward, 38. Wolf characterizes the questions 53 to 57 as both what? So let's look at 53 to 57. What does it say here? But we have to ask ourselves in here and now, do we wish to join that procession or don't we? Or what terms shall we join that procession? Okay, so they're talking about sort of questioning the procession itself. So we want to sort of find lines that directly reflect what women, in this case, what Wolf thinks of the questions that were asked, of the procession. So when we look at 46 to 47, let's see if that gives us what we need. 46 to 47, let's see. We are here on the bridge to ask ourselves certain questions. No, that's not addressing those questions. That's saying we should just ask those questions, right? Okay, let's look at 48 to 49. They're very important questions, and we have very little time to answer them. There we go. Because it gives us directly what we need in terms of what she thinks about the question. So she said they're important, one, and then what? Very little time to answer them. So important and very little time. Important and very little time. So when we look here, important, momentous, very little time. Pressing. Exactly, there we go. So honestly, when you guys look at these questions, you don't necessarily need to know what all the words necessarily mean within each individual line or what this passage even means as a whole. What you need to understand is how can you find the proper evidence to support the line questions, build up the line questions, and then finally proceed to the main idea questions. Okay, so let's look at number 49. Which choice was clearly captures the meaning of the figure sixpence referred to in lines 70 to 71. So we look at 70 to 71, says it was that they won us the right to a brand new sixpence. False now should go on thinking how we are to spend that sixpence. Okay, so we want to find with this kind of question what the object and what the subject of the sentence are. So in this case, they won us the right to a brand new sixpence. How are we to spend that sixpence? Right? So let's look at this. Right to our tolerance, right to our knowledge, right to our opportunity, right to our perspective. Okay, so when I see this, how are we to spend that tolerance, knowledge, opportunity, perspective? Can you spend tolerance? Can you spend knowledge? Nope. Can you spend perspective? Nope. How do you spend an opportunity? That's the only one that makes sense here, right? So what we're trying to do is we're trying to insert these words directly within the sentence to see what grammatically makes sense. So most people think this is a question of whether matching the right meaning makes sense, but that's a part of it, but also what's natural in terms of grammatical sense, which word flows with the actual sentence. Okay, and then finally 41. The range of places and occasions listed in 72 to 76 mainly serve to emphasize what? So 72 to 76, so they're gonna give us these locations. But before we actually look at these locations, let's look at how does he introduce these locations in the first place? So it says, think we must. We'll just think in offices. Okay, so we don't have to actually read these locations because we already have the right answer. Think we must, let us think. So they said, but we need to think, right? So, if we need to think, another word for needing to think is what? Pervasive, the need for critical reflection. So I'm gonna fill these all in. Okay, and then going back to the central claim. So these questions are actually going to be infinitely easier, these main idea questions, now that we've done the other questions here. So the main purpose of the passage is to what? So we just talked about how the passage is talking about what? Women need to come to terms with the fact that they are now joining the procession of the sons of men, right? Okay, so a lot of times with these main purpose questions, we're reading the first and last lines helps us out. But let's look. How does this passage end here? It says, where in short is it leading us to the procession of the sons of men? So they're talking about this procession of the sons of men was very, very exclusionary originally, right? But they're slightly letting women in. But it's not necessarily done with. So when we look, emphasize the value of a tradition, no. She's against this tradition, so no. Stress the urgency of an issue, highlight the severity of social divisions. It's talking about women needing to advance their needs, and not necessarily the severity, but about women needing to advance their needs, right? So not C, question the feasibility, how easy something is. That's not about that. So stress the urgency of an issue makes the most sense here. And then finally, 33. The central claim of the passage is that what? Okay, so this is actually very, very similar. So the central claim is what? Educated men face a decision about how to engage with existing institutions. In this case, it's existing institutions prefer the procession of men. I think this is an okay answer, so I'm not going to touch it right now. Women can have positions of influence in society only if they give us some of the power of traditional roles. This is not necessarily what it's talking about. Women actually have continual rights now, right? So it's not B. The bail monopoly and power in English society has had grave and continuing effects. No, it's about women having opportunities now, right, to move forward. The entry of educated women into positions of power traditionally held by men will transform these positions. That might be a claim made within the passage, but it's not the central claim. So, just looking at those last lines, the fact that she answered the question, right? She answered, where in short is it leading us? What are these professions and why should we take money out of them? She's asking these questions. Women need to face these questions and make a decision. So, A is the right answer. Okay, now that we've gone over the passage, I hope that you guys get from this that these kind of passages, these history passages, are not nearly as hard as they seem to be. When I read this passage for the first time, I don't necessarily know what the passage is talking about as a whole. But when I actually look at these individual line questions, build up my understanding of the passage to the questions, and answer the main idea questions finally, then the test becomes infinitely easier. Thank you, guys.